So now I want to talk a bit about the scientific psychology that Kahneman and Tversky were doing. And remember at the outset, I said that their aim was to test the assumptions of classical economics that people, households, and firms are rational in their pursuit of their aims, either satisfaction or utility in the case of individuals and households, or profit in the case of firms. So they have this hypothesis that no, we don't calculate our way around the world. We don't do system two thinking. We don't analyze because it takes too long, and we don't have necessary facts, and we don't know what the mathematical model is, and we don't have the brain power. Instead, we rely on heuristics and biases. Okay, so let me tell you a story about Linda. So Linda did philosophy at university. She was politically active as a student. She had a job in the bookstore, and then she graduated. So here's two possibilities. One is that Linda is a bank teller, right? That having graduated, she's got a job as a bank teller. The other possibility is that she's a bank teller and a feminist. Now, of those two, which do you think is more likely? Possibility one, that Linda is a bank teller, and possibility two, that Linda is a bank teller and a feminist. A remarkable number of people go for possibility two. They think that Linda being a bank teller and a feminist is more likely than Linda being a bank teller. But that can't be right, because two events conjoined together cannot be more likely than one event on its own, right? By conjoining events, you make the conjoined events are always less likely than any of the events taken individually. Nevertheless, that's the answer people give. And there are various ways of interpreting that experimental result. And you rerun the experiment in various ways to knock out various possible interpretations. And the robust result is that humans are not very good at thinking about probability. Anchoring and adjustment. So we get hold of, once we've given somebody a number, we try to use it the next time we need the number. So this experiment, you give people some numbers. You ask them a question about the number of coffee shops in North America, or the number of passenger miles traveled across Asia in a given year, or something like that, right? Some exercise that will generate some big number. And then you ask them to estimate the population of Turkey. By the way, all of these experiments pretty much take place in North America, and the subjects for them are mostly American psychology students. I mention this because the experiment relies on people having no idea what the population of Turkey might be. So that relies on Turkey being an obscure country a long way away from where the experiment is happening. I think it wouldn't work so well here. Anyway, the result is that people's estimates of the population of Turkey are tied to, they depend on, they change according to the numbers that you gave them in the previous exercise, even though the previous exercise made no mention of the population of Turkey and was completely irrelevant to it, right? So you give people some priming numbers by getting them to think about coffee shops in North America, or the amount of passenger plane hours in South America, let's say, something completely irrelevant. And if they have a bigger number from the first exercise, they will give you a bigger estimate of the population of Turkey. Why? This is called the anchoring heuristic, that if you've got a number from somewhere, we tend to work off that, even if it's irrelevant, right? Okay. The affect heuristic. So the affect heuristic says that we tend to judge the likelihood of an event according to whether we like it or not, whether it feels good. Or we judge the danger of an event according to whether it feels good. So things that make us feel good, things that give us warm fuzzy, we tend to underestimate the dangers. I mean, actually, this again, this is, you think this is the science of the bleeding obvious. I mean, thank you, Professor. Really, did you take very much money for proving this? But the point is, they've put numbers on it. They've put numbers on it, and it can't be true if the economic model of human judgment is also true, right? So the important thing here is not whether or not you find it obvious. The important thing is that it's incompatible with the leading model of human judgment used in economics at the point when Tversky and Kahneman started their research. Of course, every economist in the world has now read Tversky and Kahneman's stuff and made adjustments to their own research practice, right? So don't walk away with the idea that, you now know how to defeat the entire economics profession. No, the economists are ahead of you. They've read the book. Anyway, the affect heuristic basically says people's assessments of risk depend on how warm fuzzy they are about the activity. So think about people's driving choices, right? People will judge that driving after or driving in the dark, if they're going to see somebody they want to see or something like that, they won't think of it as very dangerous. But swimming in the sea, they might think of as very dangerous because it's cold and unpleasant, right? The last one I want to mention is the availability heuristic. So the availability heuristic means that you judge the salience or the importance of individuals according to how easily they come to mind, right? So if you're trying to think about whether, I don't know, if you're trying to think about whether dogs are nice, well, if you have some examples of dogs that come easily to mind, so maybe there's some enormous dog that always barks at you, that the neighbors keep, and that it seems really vicious. This is the only dog you meet, right? I mean, maybe you pass other dogs in the park, but this dog clearly wants to kill you, and it barks at you every day. Expresses its desire to sink its teeth into your flesh daily. Well, if you're invited to think about whether dogs are nice, whether dogs are trustworthy, whether it's safe to have, I don't know, maybe the question is whether it would be safe to have dogs in care homes because they might be comforting for people, but is it safe, right? Somebody asks you this question. You don't think about dogs generally. You think about that vicious brute because it's the dog that comes most easily to mind. And it really seems to you unlikely that that dogs are safe in care homes. It feels like a bad idea to have dogs in care homes. Why? Well, because the dog that you're thinking about is the dog that comes easily to mind, and that is the one that barks at you every day and clearly wants to kill you. So much for dogs. What about people? Well, that clearly works too, right? So I have a hypothesis, which is that the reason why young people are less xenophobic, less hostile to foreigners than older people, is not because young people are necessarily nicer. I mean, people, the human species, there's no reason to think that the human species gets intrinsically nicer or less nice from one generation to the next. But we have different experiences. And education, certainly in the UK, has become much more internationalized in its staffing over the last 2 or 3 decades, right? So whereas somebody my age, the teachers who taught me were all British, right? They were the only foreign teacher I had was Frau McCormack, who taught German, who was in fact a German national, married to a Mr. McCormack. Our French teacher was Miss Wilson, who was, a British person. Whereas young people now in the UK have been taught by a very international body of teachers. So if you think about immigrants, if your granddad thinks about immigrants, well, your granddad probably reads about them in the newspaper, right? And reads stories about immigrants committing crime or claiming benefits that somehow, undocumented immigrants are supposed to be claiming benefits. Not quite sure how that happens. So your granddad's ideas about immigrants will be formed around the examples that the media present to him. On the other hand, if you're a young British person, your ideas about immigrants, well, which immigrants are most available to you? They're the ones who taught you, right? They're nice Mr. Chavero who taught you Spanish. Now, both you and your granddad are acting on heuristics. You're both relying on the availability heuristic. If your thoughts about immigrants rely on taking the nice teachers you had in school as your examples of immigrants, well, they're not representative, right? Most immigrants are not teachers. And similarly, most of them are not criminals. So both you and your granddad are taking unrepresentative cases. Okay, so availability is that. It's using in your thinking the examples that come most easily to mind, whether or not they are truly representative of the group that you're trying to think about, right? And this combines with social media to produce polarization. So this is a really interesting thing, that if you take any debate you like, any heated debate, recent American election, Brexit, transgender rights, I mean, people get very angry about that. It's all much more heated on Twitter than it is in person. And that's partly because people let themselves off the leash when they're on social media, right? It's like when people are driving, they're more aggressive than they would be if they had to take responsibility for their actions in somebody else's face. But also, Twitter and social media generally, first of all, they bring the trolls to you, right? So they bring the most unreasonable representatives of the opposition. Let's suppose, for the sake of argument, that you are engaged in some binary dispute, right? there's this lot versus that lot, and you're inclined to agree with this lot, right? This versus them, and you pursue this on social media, and you get into a social media discussion. Well, you may get some polite replies when you make your case. You may get some polite replies, but you will also get some trolls. You'll also get some people who've just turned up to be rude and will say really horrible things and will try to be hurtful, will try to hurt your feelings and make you feel small, and that will make you angry, right? Those are the members of the opposing party that stick in your mind the most, right? So, whereas if you were pursuing this dispute, this political disagreement or whatever it is, if you were doing it live in meetings, who would you hear most from? You would hear most from probably the chosen representatives of the organizations who were opposing you, right? So the trained, careful, media savvy opponents, right? The people who know that it serves them to be reasonable and polite and try to play nicely. That's who you would hear from, right? So I don't know, let's take an example. If you're the Countryside Alliance and you want fox hunting to be reintroduced, if you get into a debate on television, you might find yourself debating with somebody from the RSPCA or possibly the League Against Cruel Sports. In any case, you'll be arguing with somebody who knows that they can't just insult you. They have to play by some kind of rules. But on Twitter, you will come up against people who just want to be mean, right? So Twitter brings the trolls to you, first of all, and it makes them salient. So now, when you think of, if you're the Countryside Alliance, you want to reintroduce fox hunting, and you're a member, when you think about the opposition, you won't think about that misguided but nevertheless pleasant person from the RSPCA, or that passionate but nevertheless polite person from the League Against Cruel Sports. No, you will think of the person who called you terrible names on Twitter. And because that's the example, that is the representative of the opposition who comes to mind most easily, the availability heuristic will make you think that that's what they're all like, right? And that's why social media makes you think that the people who you're opposed to politically are all rude, trolls, unreasonable, abusive, right? Particularly if you're in the public eye, right? I mean, it's bad enough if you're a civilian, but if you are a public figure, you may get hate mail, you may get death threats, right? So the members of the opposition who come most clearly to mind, who stick in your mind, is who? It's the one that sends you the death threats. It's the ones who sent you the hate mail. It's the ones who threatened your family, right? So because they're the ones who stick in your mind, you start thinking of the opposition, your political opposition, generally as those people who send you hate mail and death threats and the like. So social media polarizes, and part of the polarizing effect is due to the availability heuristic. So if you're somebody who gets into political fights on social media with people you don't know, and you find yourself thinking of those people as all vile, all bigots, all unreasonable, it's probably the availability heuristic at work. it's probably the availability heuristic encouraging you to think of the most memorably horrible people you meet on Twitter as typical of the whole body of people you're opposed to. Okay, so here is a 5-point list. We use heuristics. 1. When we have to decide quickly. 2. When we're overloaded with information, right? 3. When the question is not very important to us. 4. When we have little knowledge or understanding. And 5. When a relevant heuristic comes to mind. So notice that if you are, if you do the traditional kind of shopping where you go to the supermarket and push a trolley around, all of those 5 conditions are in place, right? Each decision has to be made quickly. You've got to do your whole shop, so you don't want to spend forever choosing between 2 yogurts, right? You want to choose the yogurt and move on. So it has to be quick. You're overloaded with information. Read the side of a yogurt pot, right? There's all that information about the calories and the contents and how it was made and where it was made and all that kind of stuff. And the prices, and you have that information for all of the yogurts. This is more information than your brain can compute. The question isn't very important. Probably you don't care. Maybe you care which yogurt you use, but you don't care which washing up liquid. What kind of lettuce? I mean, there are 8 kinds of lettuce that you might see in the supermarket. I mean, do you really care? When you have little knowledge or understanding, so you've got 2 different detergents, and you're supposed to believe that there is different chemical action. Do you know enough about how detergent works? If you read the nutritional information on the side of some food packet, well, how much potassium is enough? How much potassium is too much? It's all very well telling you how much potassium is in it. What use is that information to you? And finally, a relevant heuristic comes to mind, which is, of course, buy exactly what you bought last week. And that's why you do exactly that. You steam around the supermarket, throwing into your basket precisely what you bought last week. Why? Because all 5 conditions obtain. On the other hand, when you sit an academic exam, the opposite situation should obtain, that you shouldn't be rushed for time, even though the exam is time limited. The amount you have to write in an exam shouldn't be so much that you're just physically straining to get it done. You shouldn't be overloaded with information. You should be in control of the information. The question should be important to you, if only because this is your exam. You should have plenty of knowledge and understanding. And the question should have been written in such a way that you can't just guess, that a heuristic doesn't automatically suggest itself. Okay, so there's some thoughts about heuristics. Now go look out for them, and look for occasions when heuristic thinking is a problem because it's misleading or it allows someone to manipulate you, but also look out for situations where heuristic thinking is useful to you because you have to decide quickly, or because you don't have the necessary facts, or because you don't have the necessary mathematical model, or because the question involves too much computing and you don't have the brain power for it. Okay, talk to you soon.